Hi, welcome to part 2 of the accessibility presentation for instructional designers. Part 2 really focuses on the best practices for instructional designers to create accessible web-based learning. All right, so this is some of the best practices. I went to a presentation last year at Cal, and this is the way they broke it down, so I won't take credit for this, but it's called LIST, L-I-S-T. Links, images, styles, and tables. Okay, so the first recommendation, this is for very high level. If you just want to get, basically get your content in your web-based learning accessible, follow this. Links. Name your links correctly. This pretty much means don't just say click here. Say click here to download syllabus. It makes a lot more sense to a blind user using a screen reader if it says what the link is. So instead of saying just click here to view chapter 1, click here to download syllabus, click here to view video on buoyancy. All right, so just keep in mind that your links names should be correct and specific. The next one is images. We like to use images a lot in web-based learning. It really enhances the page. It makes it look less like just like a regular textbook online. But when we're using images, use alt tags. I went over that earlier in the presentation. Alt tags in HTML just pretty much is inside of the image tag, and it gives the blind user a description of the image itself. Instead of just try to be specific. Instead of say, if there's a picture of someone running a marathon, you want to say, don't just put man. Describe what it is. You can say, young man running marathon. That would be a good example of a specific alt tag. All right, so remember, use alt tags. This also goes for e-publishers and e-text. They should also use alt tags. Oftentimes, they'll actually create an image out of a table, and it really doesn't make sense to the user. So if it's a graph or a table, describe what the table or graph is showing. For example, you're looking at potato prices over in the 20th century, and so you can say x-axis is time, starting at 1900, ending in 1980, and the y-axis is the price of potatoes. And in this graph, it shows that potato prices are rising. That's something that you could describe the graph to give the user basic information about what they're seeing instead of just saying graph. So alt tags for images are really important for people who have visual impairments. Styles. Okay, so use styles. Oftentimes I see people just using bold and other tags that don't really make sense to screen readers. Styles are something that in HTML we use quite often. H1 meaning the header for the entire page, and there's a hierarchy to styles. H2 is going to be a subheader. H3 is the subheader, and body text is the body text of the page. So remember, use styles. It helps people with visual impairments navigate through the page. That's really going to be helpful. And tables. Use tables. So this is one of those examples that I wasn't sure that I completely agreed with, but I know what they're talking about. So tables have kind of come out of fashion for designing the architecture of a web page. That's completely true. We have CSS, we have other ways. We're oftentimes designing in a learning management system. But if you have a table of on one axis you have the name, and then the other axis you have the job title. And that will make sense, especially if you put the header tag, if you put the styles inside the table itself. Like so on the actual headers, you could put some sort of H tag there. But use the tables because through the use of tab browsing, they're able to navigate through the table, blind users using a screen reader, and that really helps people with visual impairments. So tables make sense. So use tables for what they're designed for. They're designed to display information in a table format. They're not always there to design an entire web architecture around. But it is a recommendation to use tables. All right, so remember, list. That will help you and your design team make really solid decision making from a very high level to make things more accessible for the users. All right, now we move on to captioning. Oftentimes when I'm meeting with faculty for the first time, they talk about video. They really, really want video. So right now we're in the phase of online education where video is king. We're in the transition from the brick and mortar classroom where we have a person, sage on the stage, lecturing to the students. We still have a lot of that in our web-based learning. Video does play an important and critical role in online education. But far too often we see videos without captions. This is a really easy win for people who are just trying to make their content more accessible. And captioning helps a lot of people, including people with hearing impairments and people who English is their second language. My wife, for example, she always has the captions on for when we're watching TV. And she's a fluent English speaker. That's just how she absorbs information. It also helps for people who have accents. All right, so I'm going to start with we need captions. This is going to be a very base level of what it means to be 508, even single A compliant. Just caption the videos. The UC system's looking at ways to have a system-wide captioning agreement that's still in the works. We're looking at roughly around $1 a minute right now. That's the ideal place to be. It's not always going to be the case. You kind of get what you pay for. But also note that machine captioning is not going to cut it most of the time. But in a few circumstances, I've had a faculty who uploaded their content to YouTube, and YouTube has a machine captioning. If they are fluent English speakers without any accent, it will do a 90% job, maybe even better. And you could go back in and touch up the caption files, the SRT. And that's an example of a way to have a really cheap captioning solution. But just make sure that an actual person reviews the captions before it goes live. We also need a written transcript on all audio-only files. That's a pretty obvious one. So if you have an MP3 embedded in a web page, also give a transcript for those who don't have who have hearing impairments. It needs to be, there's a few exceptions to when we don't need video. All video needs to be captioned except for these circumstances. Live video that is only being used once. Say you're streaming a lecture, a live lecture, and it's going out to say 30 people in your class, even 100 people. That does not need to be captioned. But I did speak to accessibility experts to say if it's going to over 200 to say 300 people, then you're kind of crossing the line where ADA and 508 come into play, where you might want to consider using a live transcription service for videos that are going out to that many people. The other exception is raw footage, archival footage. That doesn't always need to be captioned. Also, news coverage from the 1950s, some war footage, that doesn't need to be captioned all the time. Just use your judgment on that, but raw footage is also an exception. I'm going to touch on this really briefly. I recently read the 508, and it includes what's called audio description. It's not really common yet for education videos, but Hollywood has been doing this for a long time. It creates a separate audio track on a video, and in that audio track it describes what's happening on the screen. Let's say in a scene in a movie, a woman walks to the door and opens the refrigerator, and in the audio description it will say woman walks through the door, opens refrigerator, and grabs milk. And that helps describe what's happening in the video, especially in scenes that don't have any talking. So that's an example of what's right around the corner for education videos as well, because it's included in the 508. So audio description is something we currently don't have a lot of, but it's something that we should start thinking about moving forward for future technologies. One of the principles in the WCAG 2.0. All right, so remember, we almost always need captions unless it's unless it's a live video feed or raw footage. And start thinking about audio description. When you're looking at vendors who are going to be serving your videos, ask them, are you looking at a separate audio track for audio description? I'm currently working with a faculty at Berkeley who's looking at ways to create audio description files inside of YouTube videos. So it's coming, it's right around the corner, think about it. All right. So now we're moving on to tools for building accessible content. I'm not going to go too far into this. I'm really focusing on the principles of accessibility here. There's a lot of tools out there. All right, so one of the tools that the UC system has been using is called the AMP tool for scanning, designed by SSB BART Group. This tool is an automated tool for scanning for 508 compliance. It'll give you a rating. So what I do is I put my URL of my website in there and click run for the AMP tool for scanning, and it'll kick back a report saying, oh, I'm 80 or 90% compliant. We're currently under, we're looking at other options here because it was bringing up a lot of false positives. It was not really doing a really thorough job. It's really looking for alt text, and they can't really know if the alt text are good or not. It really checks, is it there or is it not there? So the best way to scan your website is actually to do it yourself using the principles of WCAG. All right, so the AMP tools for scanning, there's other 508 web-based tools that scan your sites. You could check them out. It's a good starting point. I wouldn't say it's the definitive answer on whether or not your website is accessible. All right, I'm also going to mention WebAIM is a color contrast checker. This is an interesting one because, like I said earlier, a lot of men especially have color blindness, and the AIM color contrast checker checks if the contrast is enough. For example, I know that UCLA's colors are blue and gold, but for some reason, the gold and the blue were the contrast wasn't strong enough. So they had to actually adjust the blue color to make it a little bit darker. So that's an example of the color checker checking on the logo, and it's discovering that there's not enough contrast in that logo. All right, Validator wc3.org is another good tool. It really checks on your cross-platform compatibility for principle number 4 of the WCAG 2.0. You're looking at ways to make sure that your tags and your markup is compatible between a number of operating systems and browsers. The last one I'm going to talk about is robobraille.org. This is a really interesting tool. I met with the designers of this product. They're from the Netherlands, and it's a really popular tool in Europe right now. They're giving it away for free. Ideally, the UC system should be paying for it, and I know that northern campuses, UC Santa Cruz, Berkeley, Davis, have paid for RoboBraille. It's a relatively cheap product, but it's also available online for individual use. Essentially what it does is converts documents to accessible formats. So if you have a scanned document, like I said earlier, it's non-OCR. You just scan a page out of a book. It's just an image. You put it into a PDF and you try to serve it out. That's not going to work for a lot of students who are using screen readers or who want to make adjustments to the text itself or copy and paste text out of there. So we need to create OCR document, an OCR document, which is object character recognition. That is going to make the text highlightable. RoboBraille does that. You upload an image file of the actual text, it will kick back an OCR document of that. It also has, after that, you could actually create an MP3. If it's an OCR document, it also creates MP3s. So say you have a long document and you just are someone who prefer to listen, you're an audiobook fan, or you have better comprehension through listening, that also is an option through RoboBraille. You could upload a Word document or PDF, and you click on select MP3. It will email an MP3 to you of that file. It has different readers' voices. There's a British accent and an American accent. It's not perfect. It's pretty good. I've used it a few times, but it's a tool that's available, and I feel that if you do have documents that need to be OCR'd, or you want to have an MP3 option for a disabled student in your class, take a look at robobraille.org. All right, so student accessibility statements. Students do not have to self-identify as disabled. It's an assumption as us as designers and faculty that we're going to do our very best to design the course content to be accessible. All right, so what are some ways to communicate this to the students? I believe that in every syllabus, you should address accessibility. You could just say to the students in the syllabus, if you're having any issues accessing the content or something is inaccessible, feel free to contact me and I'll try to change that, or also give them the phone number, email address of the OSD. That's what we call it at UCLA, the Office of Students with Disabilities. That will give them the option to seek what's called accommodation. So oftentimes, if we can't meet their needs through the technology itself, they actually meet with someone at the Office of Students with Disabilities, and that person will work with them directly to either read to them, sign to them, or just provide an accommodation for those students with disabilities. But it's important to send that message out to the students early on in the process. We don't want to discourage them in the first couple of weeks from taking an online class. We want to know, they need to know that we're here to support them through their learning experience. All right, we've reached the end of my presentation. Here's some concluding thoughts. I want all of us to approach web design thinking about all students, not just the typical ones. Oftentimes we just think, okay, this is what the typical student looks like, and we're going to design for that one. Really, like I said earlier, there's 11% of college students are disabled. So think about that. We really need to think about design as inclusive design and accessible design as a starting point, not something that we fix later on when we find out we have a student who's deaf in our class and we're adding captions in the last minute. We should really be thinking about them from the beginning. Remember that the largest student populations with those with accommodation are those with emotional and personality disorders as well as learning disabilities. There's such a wide array of different learning disabilities and emotional and personality disorders that I can't give you advice to how to design for them. But keep their learning styles in mind. Keep universal design for learning in mind. For example, people with ADD, ADHD, it's better to chunk up the content into about no more than 15-minute pieces. Give them a break in between the video pieces or in the content itself. Chunk it up. That's an example of how to help people with ADD, consume the lectures, for example. And the last thing I want to point out is making accessible design really helps all types of learners. People do not all learn the same. There's visual learners, kinesthetic learners, audio learners, audio-visual learners. So think about that. So visual learners are aided by captions, for example. Students who are, foreign students, people whose English is a second language, those students also really are helped by captioning, along with the deaf students. That's an example of you're hitting the deaf students, but you're also helping people who are visual learners who prefer to read, consume the content there. Remember, to use tables, charts, and graphics and animations, those types of things help visual graphic learners. Kinesthetic learners really benefit from real life experience. And audible learners, they are helped by having an option for a downloadable MP3 instead of text. They do well with video and audio files. So mix in different types of content or multimedia into your presentations. So I want you to think about this, is that designing for accessibility is really about good design. It's about designing for everyone. And that those designs help all different types of students and all different types of learners. I'd like to thank you for your time in watching this presentation on accessibility. I hope that you've learned something. I have my email address on this site, and if you feel free to contact me with more questions. I'm going to be available for any questions you have about accessibility. Thank you very much.